In the Blink of an Eye by Dr. Marguerite Howick. Read by Edana Minghella. If she had known she was going to lose her sight, she would never have bought the glass-topped coffee table. How many more times was she going to walk into the corners of that glass top and gouge lumps out of her legs? She had asked for corner protectors at the local hardware shop, only for the assistant to inquire, "For a child?" Waspishly she had replied, "Yes, me." That summed it up. She did feel like a child, vulnerable. Last Christmas she had woken up with no effective vision whatsoever in her left eye, all wobble and ripple around a dark mass. Just like that. No warning. Or was that strictly true? Hadn't she found herself swatting what she thought was a large black fly away from that side of her face a couple of times? First stop after the New Year had been the optician's. Nothing can be done, really. Macular hole. In severely short-sighted people from birth, the retina is thin. Vitreous gel dries out, sticks to retina, tugs a hole. This is as good as it gets. Gradual deterioration. Right eye will go the same way. We will refer you to a specialist, but... What a shock. Nothing could be done? It was her age, really? She still felt 23. Well, perhaps 27 certain days, but 66? Surely that wasn't old. And she can't have been destined to live the rest of her life groping blindly around a world, parts of which were still waiting for her to explore. A crescendo of anxiety. Oh, she really hadn't seen this coming. And yet she had studied the scans. Right eye okay, left eye a car crash. So she had taken a deep breath and got on with it. She had months to wait for the hospital appointment, and after checking with them that she had time, she set off on all her planned travels abroad. She had to get her head around all of this, and the distance would offer her some perspective. Luckily it did. That defining moment in March, when she had just arrived in Hong Kong, embarked a ship, and then, jet-lagged and hot, panicking about the future, had stumbled into one of the on-board theatres, not caring what was showing, just wanting the womb-like darkness to wrap itself around her as a comfort blanket. She hadn't even noticed the young Hungarian musician walk onto stage and wordlessly pick up his instrument until, oh, that first sound, such a haunting melody that tore her apart. Astor Piazzolla's Oblivion. An Argentinian tango of such sensual passion that her tears had fallen unnoticed. The realization that to have been able to see him clearly but not hear the sounds he was making, not hear the music, now that would have been devastating. That would have been far worse. So after all these months of fretful torment, she breathed again. That small voice of calm was balm to her soul, and the world was a kinder place again. She might be going to lose her sight, but there were worse scenarios, and everything really would be all right. And as her voyage continued, was it her imagination, or hadn't her hearing become more acute? Was it overcompensating for the depletion of the other sense? Hadn't she heard that soft step of the orangutan in the Malaysian sanctuary just before she emerged from behind the trees, proudly presenting the baby she had adopted after her own had died in a forest fire? Hadn't she detected the snap of the broken twig in the Alaskan forest a few seconds before they turned to see the enormous brown bear crashing through the bushes? Hadn't the pop of one bubble on the surface of the water at icy straight point alerted her a heartbeat before the sea appeared to boil as 6 or 7 bubble-netting whales sent all the fish floating to the top for a manic feeding frenzy? She was reconciled now to the future. And so when finally the day came to meet the consultant at the eye clinic, she burst in upon him, full of renewed vigour, wanting to reassure him that she was a woman of the millennium and completely understood there was nothing he could do for her and that she was at peace with that. A gentle smile, kind eyes, and a pleasing, mellifluous voice. His first words: "I can offer you the chance to see again. I can operate. This is my specialism." One of those moments when you know your life will never be the same again. Those weeks waiting for the operation seemed endless, and she had planned her overnight stay, like a sleepover, packing new slippers, luxurious toiletries, and gifts and cards for the consultant and his nurse. She didn't want to be just an eyeball to them. And afterwards, after the general anaesthetic, more scans, more tests. There was more damage to the retina than we thought. I am pleased with how it looks at this stage, but try not to get an infection. If you see a dark shadow, the gas bubbles will go. How many other poor souls had sat where she sat, hearing but not really listening? Then released to fresh air and a world that could not comprehend how they were feeling, accompanied by an all-consuming terror and 2 bottles of eye drops to see them through. She had entered the hospital with poor sight, but now had nothing. It was all blur, fog, restless movement, dancing images. It was so very frightening. What if this were it? What if she never saw anything ever again in this eye, and then the other eye went? How would she cope? How would she live alone? Would she ever be able to draw again? How could she be herself? And the most important question, when could she wear mascara? Positioning was important, and so she lay or sat with her head down for hours, eyes closed, ears strained to pick up the sounds of lives carrying on outside, regardless of her plight. She would allow herself a break every hour to make a cup of tea, but naturally had not factored in clearing up the resultant mess. It helps when pouring scalding water from a kettle to a cup if you do not misjudge the distance between the two by at least 6 inches. She had knitted 7 baby blankets, dropping stitches and undoing each one before starting again. Used tweezers to pluck a stray whisker from her face, but her hand had slipped and she had almost poked the eye out. Attempted a Sudoku puzzle, unwittingly using a wax earplug instead of an eraser, wondering why the pencil mark was not disappearing, and had tried to text a message using the TV remote control. There's always a silver lining, and after one appointment she had luxuriated in a double seat on the overcrowded bus all to herself. A few tears had been shed walking to the bus stop, and she was oblivious to the fact that she had flushed out the thick orange eye drops. The desiccated remains were caked on her cheekbone, so she appeared to be in the early stages of leprosy. No wonder the paying bus customers stayed well clear. Sight had to be the most precious of all senses. So why was it never until you had lost something that you appreciated how valuable it had been? How on earth did blind people cope? This was offering her an entirely different perspective on their condition, and she was full of admiration for them, because she was already ragged with frustration, and her physical demeanour had changed drastically. No longer walking tall, but bowed, a little hunched, diminished, looking downwards at the pavement, moving slowly, carefully, misjudging the distances, and flinching when others came close. One stranger had merely brought his mobile phone to his ear as he walked past her, but that sudden movement at the edge of her limited peripheral vision had caused her to duck. She thought he was about to strike her. Poor man had looked so apologetic. Then there was the received wisdom of others. At least you still got your own teeth. There's always someone worse off than you. I knew someone with a macular hole went blind. My vitreous humour detached. I thought I had been watching a flock of crows. Thanks to that last comment, every time she saw black birds in the sky, she assumed the moment of total retinal collapse was upon her. Sometimes it really is a flock of crows. Finally, the day arrived when the gas bubbles had gone and the last procedure was imminent. I will just laser off the scar tissue from the implant. There is a risk of retinal detachment, but it may not make a noticeable difference. There's no more I can do for the retina or the implant. It will never be the same as it was. And it was nearly Christmas again. Almost a year since this nightmare had begun. The journey was nearly over, and this man had done everything in his power to help her see as well as could be expected again. He had probed, repaired, fine-tuned this left organ, and now the moment of truth. She would again leave the hospital with impaired vision, but by the next morning she would know what she was left with. She travelled home on the bus with eyes closed, as if she were just resting them, and listened to the chitter-chatter and burbling of the other passengers. Which Christmas gifts were left to buy? How difficult it was to know what to get Uncle David. Whether it was best to prepare the vegetables the night before, and creative ways to use the leftovers on Boxing Day. It all washed over her in an inconsequential wave. Finally, the next morning, and in her first waking moment, she did not dare open her eyes. She felt her way through to the living room, and only then would she lift her lids and blink. Elsewhere that Christmas, bells might be pealing, choristers singing, and children squealing, but the only discernible sound here was the gentle intake of breath from a woman who, after a tortuously long year, was beginning to see something again. An image was emerging, crystallizing, and the edges were sharpening. It was the most incredibly beautiful glass-topped coffee table.